If I were to ask you what the defining characteristic of Michigan football is, generally, as a program, I'm curious to hear what your answer would be. And maybe this is where you might want to pause and leave a comment. And we'd appreciate it if you did, by the way. You can like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. We'd really appreciate it. We'd appreciate the support. But I'm curious to hear your answers to that question at the outset of this video. And I'm sure many of the answers might be a blue collar mentality, winning the right way, doing all the little things right, winning with sound technique, winning in the trenches, winning the old school kind of ground and pound with that kind of toughness and that hard-working mentality that you would expect from, the classic Bo Schembechler and Lloyd Carr and Jim Harbaugh teams of old, and even going back, to the Fitz Chrysler days and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think you'd be wrong at all. That's how Michigan has identified itself, especially through that historic 2021 through 2023 run that we all so very much enjoyed. The workman's jackets and everything was a nice little touch, I would say, to the kind of identity of those teams. And it seems like that identity, while it kind of went away a little bit in the Sharon Moore era, that identity is definitely back. And I do think that the new coaching staff and Kyle Whittingham and company are, the perfect fit for this program, because look at what Kyle Whittingham has done throughout his college coaching career, killing giant after giant with that very kind of, I'm going to pound you and hit you and out physical you and destroy you in every way that really matters on the gridiron. Talent be damned, star power be damned. That's kind of the large, broad identity of the program. And that's what I really have come to expect and what I've come to really appreciate about Michigan football as a fan. But there's something else that I think really, really defines Michigan. And I think it goes along with that kind of blue collar, hardworking mentality. And that's that this program, probably better than any other program over the past 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seasons, and even going back further than that, has been a program that has developed players at an elite level. And when I mean developed, because I think sometimes people get it mixed up and people have different definitions of developed, and I don't think any definition is particularly wrong. But when I say developed, I mean taking guys who were overlooked or kind of forgotten about or never really given a chance in high school recruiting and truly making great college players out of them. Even in just the last few years, before recording this episode, I wrote down a few players I could think of off the top of my head that kind of fit this mold. Those being guys like Ronnie Bell, Mikey Sandra-Still, Mike Barrett, Kenneth Grant, Rod Moore, Colston Loveland, Khalil Mullings even over the last couple of seasons had been a pretty damn good running back for this team that started out as like a 3-star linebacker recruit that was like 3rd or 4th on the depth chart in the linebacking room. Even some of the best players Michigan has had over the past 5 or 6 seasons have been guys like Blake Corum and Aiden Hutchinson, who, while they were 4-star recruits coming out of high school, if you look back at the recruiting reports and where they ultimately ranked in like the top 150 or top 300 coming out of high school on 24/7, neither of those guys were projected to be the Heisman candidates that they turned out to be. And you may be asking, why am I saying all this stuff? Why am I mentioning all this? Well, I think I've found, or at least I think I've discovered, or I should say rediscovered. I should say I rediscovered who I think is next in line to kind of be that guy, be that next Mikey Barrett or Kenneth Grant or Mikey Sandra-Still on this defense for this program. And I say rediscovered because I was actually pretty excited about Lugard Edokpayi, who was the subject of this episode. I was pretty excited when he originally committed to Michigan. I was excited because of the extreme high upside that he had coming out of high school. But he was still a guy who was a bit of a late bloomer, similar to guys like Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham and Colston Loveland in some ways, a guy that didn't play a lot of high school ball, a guy that had to learn how to play football when he was in high school, but a guy that had all of the traits and the elite measurables nonetheless. A guy that largely got overlooked and was a late riser in the 2023 class. And as one of my favorite football podcasts like to say, we like late risers because late risers, they never quite rise as high as maybe they should be. And guys who fall late in recruiting rankings never quite fall as much as they should. That's the psychological concept of anchoring, by the way, at work. Michigan football this next season is going to have a really, really good defensive end / edge room. Don't get me wrong. It's going to be filled with guys like John Henry Daley, the transfer from Utah that we've already discussed, guys like Cam Brandt, who a lot of people expect a lot out of the season, and highly rated recruits that everyone was excited about in the last couple of seasons, including guys like Nate Marshall and Dominic Nichols. But I wanted to make this video in particular to highlight Lugard Edokpayi because, well, I said rediscovered a minute ago. Let me provide some more context for that. As many of you may know, I just did a video on Bryce Underwood where I talked about everything basically in the quarterback room coming into this next season. You can go back and watch it if you'd like. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. While I was doing my kind of research for the Bryce Underwood video and going back for, I think, probably a 5th time, yeah, that's how much of a nerd I am when it comes to this stuff. Going back for a 5th time now and watching the spring game tape on Bryce Underwood, there was a certain someone who stood out. A certain someone who was lined up for much of the first and second quarters of that spring game against guys like Andrew Sprague and Blake Frazier, if I'm remembering right, who was putting moves on some starting guys who project to either be or potentially be or probably be starting tackles for this team, and beating them with a good move to the outside, a good move to the inside, having some nice swim moves, running some stunts and getting to the inside, and batting some balls down even as Bryce Underwood was trying to throw out of the pocket. Yes, 2 of Bryce Underwood's incompletions in the spring game this past year were thanks to Lugard Edokpayi and his insane length batting some balls down, but he also got some pressures. Lugard Edokpayi, if no one out there, if you're not familiar with him or you've kind of forgotten or you weren't already aware, was a 4-star recruit out of the 2023 class and will be a redshirt sophomore in the 2026 season. He was a 93 rated player on the 24/7 composite rating coming out of high school. And again, he had a decently high rating, but he was a late bloomer and a late riser in recruiting rankings. And I frankly think he's somebody who maybe didn't rise quick enough. And the interesting thing about Lugard that I bring up is he popped on the tape in the spring game. And if you look back at everything that was said about him back in the recruiting process, they talked about his insane combination of speed and length. The guy is pushing 6'8" tall at this point. But back in high school, the weaknesses were a lack of size and a lack of technique because he hadn't been playing high school football for that long, and the college game was going to be a bit of a learning curve, a steep learning curve for him. But he had that size, he had those really elite measurables, and he had that speed that, well, NFL coaches, NFL defensive coordinators look for at that level. Watching the tape of Lugard Edokpayi now that he's in his 3rd season in the program, he's added that size. He's now over 6'7", and he weighs about 250 pounds. He only weighed about 218 coming out of high school, if I remember right. The tape really spoke for itself when I was watching that spring game, which really inspired me to do a video on him because, like I said, everything that was quoted by people from 24/7, everything that they said about him coming out of high school that he needed to work on, seems like he's improved on. He's improved in the physical side of things by adding that weight, and he's also improved when it came to the technique. Lugard Edokpayi was a guy who was noted by 24/7 Sports, by their scouts coming out as somebody who had all the potential in the world as long as they put those two things together, and it appears like he might have already done so. And by the way, I'm just going to quote from the 24/7 scout who wrote the report on him coming out of high school right here. Quote, he was a spider out on the edge with what appears to be some of the longest limbs in the cycle. Size hasn't been verified in person, but reportedly measured 6'6", 218 pounds the summer before his senior season and had a near 84-inch wingspan. Is still figuring out how to consistently create pressure after making the transition from basketball to football, but has put very encouraging stretches of play on tape. Wins more times than not with his abnormal reach, but can also catch opposing tackles off guard with his initial burst. Has operated primarily out of a wide 9 technique at the prep level and will likely need to keep doing the same thing on Saturdays unless he undergoes a major physical transformation and adds a ton of bulk to a rather slender frame. Seems like he's done that again, as we've seen in the weight room this offseason for Michigan football. He should be viewed as a developmental pass rusher with a ton of upside. Must improve his game in a variety of different ways, but could prove to be quite the score for someone as his length allows him to attack the corner like few others. Rare features destined to draw the eyes of NFL scouts if he keeps progressing. And that's what I'm saying. He seems to have progressed. He seems to have added that weight, and he seems to be a real threat at the edge position for Michigan football this coming season. I really solidly, honestly think he could compete in fall camp to kind of maybe leapfrog a couple of guys on that depth chart like Dominic Nichols and Nate Marshall. I know those guys are also really highly rated as well, but at the very least, he could be a very nice piece in what might be an elite edge rushing room for the Wolverines in 2026. Do not sleep on Lugard Edokpayi this next season. That's going to do it for this video, you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, as always, be kind to other people out there.